Can we talk about something real quick? Good morning to you, by the way. Hope you have a great Wednesday. Tune into our live stream tonight on Power Stroke Tech Talk with A-Rod. It's where all of us Ford techs get together and we kind of talk about the industry and what's going on with Power Strokes. It's our Wednesday. And then we squeeze some other questions in there sometimes as well. We just talk about the industry in general. Let's talk about maintenance and how we do things. This morning I woke up and there's a creator on TikTok, no names, not important. And the gentleman has the Mazda 626. If you watch this, I have to use you as an example. It's perfect. It's what's spiced up this enticing conversation today. The guy's doing rear brakes on a Mazda 626, and he says, you know, if you look at this piston, it would looks like a normal piston, but it's not. It's actually one of the pistons that you turn in. But if you notice, it doesn't have the holes on the face of it. You got to remove a 14 millimeter bolt on the back side of it, which ends up exposing a 4 millimeter Allen inside that you have to back out in order to press the piston in. But crack the bleeder, run a line from the bleeder over into a jug or a reservoir that you can, as you're pushing the piston in, you can push that fluid back out into that reservoir instead of back up into the brake booster. You don't want to overfill the brake booster. Well, first of all, you don't belong doing brakes if you're topping brake fluid off because it's low. The only reason brake fluid would be low is because of two things. You have a leak or you have low brake pads. As the brake pad material decreases, that means more fluid has to come out of the reservoir to take up for that space where the brake pads are decreasing. Now, if you have a leak, there's several possibilities. If you have old school wheel cylinders in the back, the wheel seals could be blown out on it. If you have a blown brake line, if you have a faulty master cylinder where it's blown out past the seal into the brake booster, right? If you have a seal that's leaking around one of your caliper pistons. These are the common leaks that we see. You don't need to crack the bleeders when you're pushing in the pistons. Here's the reason why you don't crack bleeders when you're pushing in the pistons. First of all, the reservoir should not have been topped off to begin with because of low brake pads. That just indicates you don't know what you're doing when you're messing with cars. Brake fluid is not a product that you top off because it's low. It's a thing that you find out why it's low and then choose, oh, I got a leak and I got to get it to the shop right this second. I'm going to put a little brake fluid in here because the leak is so small, it's just getting the line wet. I'm pretty sure if I baby my emergency brake to get to the shop and maybe I need some assist from the regular brake, I can get it done to get the vehicle there. That's why you would top off brake fluid if you didn't have the vehicle towed, which is the safest thing to do in a situation like that anyway. You don't top off brake fluid because it's low, because pads are low. You change the brakes and do your maintenance so you can push the fluid back through the line. What little bit pushes back and pushes the fluid back up to a proper level. And then, of course, as a good owner, you'll change out your brake fluid at least by every 2 years. You don't put a jug outside the caliper and crack the bleeder loose, so when you're pushing in the piston, the fluid that's in the piston goes into the jug instead of pushing back in the line because it's contaminated. If that fluid is contaminated, the entire system is contaminated. I'm tired of hearing the BS shenanigans from people about, oh, you're going to push garbage back up into the ABS module and the fluid that's down by the caliper is more wore out than the fluid that's in the rest of the system. No, Jack, it doesn't work that way. If the fluid is bad at the caliper, the fluid is bad in the entire system, and it all has to be flushed out. Who comes up with these stories and theories and stuff like that? And who's telling people to crack the bleeders loose and let the fluid push over into a reservoir? Another thing that you cause people to believe when you tell them that's the right way to do it is they'll break a bleeder. If you're from the Salt Belt, you know, unless you're being paid to touch that bleeder and notify the customer ahead of time, if I break this bleeder and I have to extract it, I might get lucky extracting it, but we might have to replace a caliper, because if the bleeder's that bad, typically the caliper's probably that bad, and they're normally $50 to $75 for your average caliper. Some of them get up there around $100, $125, $150, but that's the price of owning a vehicle, Jack. That's just how it is. If you can't accept that, then you don't own a vehicle. Here's another reason not to crack a bleeder when you're doing just general brakes. If you're doing a fluid flush every time you do brakes and that's your shop policy, that's different. I get it. But not all shops have that policy, and not all customers can afford an extra $150 for a brake service, fluid service, while they're there doing brakes. And if that's your policy, then you got to send the customer down the road to somebody else that will do the brakes and not charge them the extra money for the fluid service. If you crack that bleeder when pushing the piston back in, you can get an idea on whether or not that piston's froze up or something's wrong with that brake line back there as well, because you can feel the resistance. You can kind of get an idea and feel for if something's wrong with the line. Is something collapsing inside the line? Why is this fighting me so much to push this in? This is not normal. But if I would have cracked that bleeder, I could have pushed the fluid right out of the little line. I would have met no resistance, no nothing at all, and I wouldn't have got an idea on what was actually going on. Cracking a bleeder to push the fluid that's in it is simply a made-up thing that somebody has in their head, that they feel like that little bit of fluid that's in that caliper area that has been closest to the piston, where the work and heat and stuff has been happening, is peace of mind to them that little fluid gets pushed out into a reservoir. But they never take into consideration the other things that you can miss by doing that. Maybe you don't see a leak because you're in the vehicle and you're using the brakes and stuff all the time, and it's not always there, but it needs a little resistance to show itself. Maybe something down there in that area, when you're pushing that piston back in, as you're pushing it back in and you're not using the crack the bleeder method, you might be able to see something. Oh wait, there's that. That's why I've been dripping a little bit, or using a little fluid, or that's where it's coming from. Maybe you don't see it right away. Maybe it's something so small that needs a little bit of pressure to show itself, and it's only every once in a while. Cracking the bleeder loose on a caliper was something that was taught back in like the 90s, and it was like a Toyota MR2 or something like that back in the day, where they had to put out a technical service bulletin to warn people that if you meet resistance when pushing in the calipers, crack the bleeder loose to give you that little bit of extra relief. And the indication is you have a collapsed brake line, so you might need to replace the brake line in a situation like that. Or because of that type of brake system, it was a little bit more rough to push the piston back in. So an acceptable method on that particular vehicle, I think it was like an old Toyota MR2 or something like that, was okay to crack the bleeder because it was really hard to push the bleeder in. Let's stop spreading misinformation. Let's educate people properly. Teach them by the book, and then even make it better. But not retract and tell them bad information to lead them astray. Cracking the bleeder loose is an unnecessary task that people take upon themselves because it makes their little minds feel better about getting a little dirty fluid out of the line, because they're under the impression that some Jimbo, Tomball, something, Grandpa Jim back in the day said it's the right thing to do. And it's not. Hell, my uncle back in the day used to say lubricating main bearings before installing them was the right thing to do. But once you gain a little knowledge, you realize lubricating main bearings before installing them clean and dry on the mating surface in a block is, you leave yourself susceptible to spinning a bearing once your new engine is put together. That was the old school technology, or the old school mindset, was to do things like that, and it was completely not necessary. Y'all be blessed. Have a great day. Use this as an educational tool. Share this with your students. Share this with other technicians that may be doing this, and kind of wake them up a little bit and help them realize that over the last 20, 25 years, 30 years, There's not a single vehicle in the market that a manufacturer has ever said to crack the bleeder loose and be susceptible. You make yourself susceptible to breaking that bleeder and causing more stress than actually doing the job correctly. Unless doing a brake service, a brake fluid service, cracking the bleeder loose is not a necessary task. Have a great day. Be blessed.